Hello and welcome to the Music Professor channel. I'm here with Loki when we're going to tell you all about Bizet's Carmen, which 150 years ago was being performed. It was in the middle of its first season at the Opera Comique in Paris. The premiere was in March 1875 and it continued through May and June. It wasn't enormously successful. In fact, it had kind of decent-ish audiences, but sometimes not full houses. And there was so much controversy and so much hostility in the press that Bizet himself was quite depressed about it. And I think it took its toll on him to such an extent that he died at the beginning of June 1875, right in the middle of the first season. So it's a terrible story because it's an opera that has since become prodigiously famous. You know, it's one of the most famous operas that exist. But like so many things, its origins were so controversial because it kind of is an amazing work of art. Amazing works of art shock people and distress people and almost always cause a kind of explosive response. And Bizet couldn't quite handle it. He smoked too much. And he was in his mid-30s. He was only 36, so he's rather like Mozart, only a year older than Mozart, rather like Mendelssohn, rather like Schubert, the youngest of the great composers to die at 31. But he's one of those. He's a composer of prodigious gifts who died far too young. Let me just read you a couple of quotes from contemporary reviews. So here's one from Le Siècle in Paris. The heart of Monsieur Bizet made callous by the school of dissonance and experimentation, needs to recapture its virginity. Carmen is neither scenic nor dramatic. One cannot express musically the savagery and the caprices of Mademoiselle Carmen with orchestral details. Nourished by the succulent harmonies of the experimenters of the music of the future, Bizet opened his soul to this doctrine that kills the heart. I mean, I'll tell you one thing about old reviewers. They really meant it. And there's an intensity about the response that shows that it mattered. It mattered. Maybe it's sad that nowadays art often doesn't seem to matter as much as it did in those days. We could do with it mattering more, couldn't we? But at the same time, these reviews were savage and, you know, I think they contributed to... I don't know if they literally contributed to Bizet's early death. I mean, the myth is Carmen was a failure, Bizet died as a result of that. It's slightly more complicated than that, but I think the stresses of that first production weighed heavily upon a man who wasn't in the best of health and was smoking too much. Here's another Parisian review about Bizet that says, Bizet is a young musician of great and incontestable worth who writes detestable music. One of this group of French composers who have abdicated the individuality to place themselves in the harness of Wagner. So there was this view, it's hard to believe this now because there's nothing in Carmen that really sounds at all like Wagner to us. But at the time, there was this view that because of his delight, and it is true that he delights in harmonic ingenuities and a kind of colourful orchestration, they kind of put him in a Wagnerian camp. It's odd. I think people do this now. There's this tendency to want to pigeonhole artists because that's what we like to do as human beings. Here's a classic British review from 1878. By this time, Carmen was on tour and becoming an international success. Nevertheless, the London Review of 1878 says, if it were possible to imagine His Satanic Majesty, which of course is the name of a Rolling Stones album, isn't it? Right, I'll start that again. If it were possible to imagine His Satanic Majesty writing an opera, Carmen would be the sort of work he might be expected to turn out. After hearing it, we seem to have been assisting at some unholy rites, weirdly fascinating but painful. Here's another review from the New York Times in 1878. The only personage in Carmen who excites any interest is Don Jose, and that which he does excite, he destroys by the brutal and foolish crime which is the climax and end of the work. So, pretty unfavourable responses, but even so, the opera was largely a success, and it had a domino effect in kind of bursting out of the confines, if you like, of Paris and becoming an international success, to such an extent that when it got to Germany, particularly, it was a huge success. Very often, I think, artworks aren't appreciated so easily at home, where there's too much envy or there's, you know, the artist in question is too familiar in some way. As soon as it went to Germany, people were amazed by its colour and its kind of vibrant character. It was a huge success. So, for example, Bismarck, the German Chancellor, the ultimate sort of Prussian character you wouldn't associate with French culture, but he loved it so much he went 27 times. Nietzsche, who had just fallen out with Wagner and needed to find something exciting to replace his hero's music, went to see Carmen 20 times, he said. And he said that it made him feel a better man for watching it. Bizet made him feel like a better man. He felt that Carmen brought this wonderful new Mediterranean, dazzling Mediterranean character into music. It sort of breathed a new freshness, which of course, this is being contrasted to Wagner, which he felt was sort of, of course he loved Wagner really, but he'd fallen out with Wagner, and so he decided that Wagner's music was dark and gloomy and Teutonic and lacking in sparkle and light. And Carmen was exactly what he felt he needed. Another person around the same time he was absolutely bowled over by Carmen was Tchaikovsky. So Tchaikovsky, it pretty much represented the way ahead. So much so that you can hear traces of Carmen all over the Fourth Symphony, even the Pathetique Symphony, the Sixth, the Queen of Spades. It's all over his music. Tchaikovsky's comments on Carmen are really interesting. He says, "It is a music without pretensions to depth, but so charming in its simplicity, so lively, so sincere, rather than invented, that I've almost learnt the whole opera by heart, from beginning to end." Later on, he said to Madame von Meck, his patroness, he said that Carmen was perhaps the most outstanding operatic work of our age. And he went on to say that there was something purely rational in the process of musical invention among contemporary composers, a sort of obsession with new and ingenious harmonic effects, which he felt were cold and lacking inspiration. But suddenly, he said, a Frenchman, Bizet, turns up, whom I do not hesitate to call a genius, and in whom all these poignant and spicy effects are not made up, but rather pour out in a free-flowing stream, flattering the ear, but at the same time also moving and affecting one. But I really love Tchaikovsky's response to Carmen because it's absolutely real and true. Here we are in the 21st century, and of course we can't respond like Tchaikovsky in the sense that the opera has become so familiar and everyone knows the tunes that it lacks that freshness. It's become a sort of warhorse, a piece that's enormously popular, but then many of us who actually avoid going to see it at the Opera House because it sort of gets overdone, a bit like La Traviata. There are these, or Madame Butterfly, it's one of these pieces that's just wheeled out, and no doubt there are many marvellous productions, but it's sort of too familiar. But if we can try to recover that extraordinary freshness it once had, I think it's good for all of us. What is that freshness? It's this kind of vitality where the opera combines at one and the same time a sort of new melodic spontaneity. It's almost like the first musical. It's an opera that's absolutely packed with tunes. I'll show you. Let's play a few. The famous Overture contrasts two tunes. One is kind of brilliant and sort of Spanish. I mean, not really Spanish, but faux Spanish. In that kind of, I'm a brilliant French composer imitating the Spanish style. So you got this famous thing with and these lovely. Look at the speed of the harmonic change, which you can see why his contemporaries found it sort of novel and striking. And of course, you got the famous Toreador tune, that comes in, and then finally, the other thing about Carmen is it's all about death. And it does this thing where there's this pun on the old French pun of l'amour, love, and la mort, death. And the opera's full of that sort of tension between those two elements. So you've got this sort of sense of fate and tragedy. These terrifying chords, terrifying rhythms. that wonderful tension between bright, fizzing, energetic Spanish style and this kind of sense of fate. The opera is beautifully balanced between those 2 points. It's this collision between night and day, darkness and light, joy and tragedy, that thing that's constantly fizzing through the piece. It's got as many famous tunes as any piece I can think of. I mean, look, let me play a few. I've played the famous ones from the Overture. How about these? Isn't that marvellous? Fantastic. Here's another one, sort of slightly in a Spanish style, or kind of gypsy Spanish style. With these. Fantastic. Now, what I love about these tunes, this one for example, it's sort of halfway between Schubert, who's a big influence, massive influence on Bizet. They look similar, oddly enough. I mean, look, let me play a bit of Schubert. So it's even got the same use of twiddling thirds. Now, look at how Bizet builds on that. The other thing, though, that's not like Schubert, but is like Eric Satie 10 years later, is this thing that you get in... I mean, Satie, I think, learned some of that exotic thing from Bizet. But in Satie, you just get these parallel movements. Do you know what? In Carmen, I wonder if it's one of the first pieces in the Western canon that simply has parallel harmonic movement. Look, you're in E minor. Then you just step down to D minor. C major. Fantastic, but it is just parallel movement all the way. You get all sorts of sort of beautiful kind of quasi-gypsy-like tunes. This one that Carmen is humming in one scene with this. And you feel it's just a hint of what would one day become a kind of musical style or cabaret style. Fantastic, effortless tunes. In that song, it's a duet, and there's this lovely military element that comes into it, and he counterpoints the two. But it's so effortless and brilliant. So in the 1960s, when Igor Stravinsky was asked to pinpoint what was so amazing about Carmen, he said the card aria, which is this marvellous, marvellous moment in the middle of the opera when there have been lots of sort of lovely little, delightful little trios and duets about fortune telling and what you can find in the cards, but they're very light-hearted, and then suddenly the focus is on Carmen herself, and it's suddenly absolutely serious because she says, the cards, she looks at the tarot cards and she says they mean death. And it's it's her own death that she's talking about, the death of herself and Don Jose at the end of the opera. Don Jose, who's been transformed from being a sort of dutiful soldier at the beginning to first of all being a jailbreaker and then a brigand and then finally a murder. So it's about someone being dragged into a moral catastrophe. And Carmen herself is an extraordinary figure because almost like Don Giovanni in Mozart's great opera from 100 years earlier, she's a heroine without a moral compass, really, who's just following her fate in an absolutely inexorable way. And incidentally, why was Carmen so shocking? I mean, maybe it was the sheer vitality of the music, but I think it was also the sort of weird realism. This was an opera in the 1870s where there weren't any gods or mythologies or anything like that. It was an opera where you saw women smoking on stage and behaving badly, and a hero who's being dragged into amorality by the force of fate and the love of a woman. These are crazy modern things. They're not really 19th century things. But what an amazing thing. He has the strings just pulsing in this primal kind of way underneath, and then her lovely low voice singing this gorgeous, slightly Chopin-esque tune, but my goodness. This is fantastic harmony, look at this. Look at this change. You don't get many chords better than that. And that very Chopin-esque turn to A flat. Every harmonic decision is the right one, isn't it? He's building towards... That's a Schubertian trick there, look, going to the major, fabulous. This is one of the bits that Stravinsky loved. Watch this. Unexpected seventh there. And look at these strings. This is just as she says, l'amour. L'amour, death. And just the very simple device of those sort of stabbing ornaments. L'amour. It's fantastic. So Carmen, the card aria, one of the great moments in opera. And partly because of the voice itself, this amazing use of the low mezzo. Carmen is really an opera for an actor-singer. You've got, I mean, it's an opera that requires good acting, and the role has to be played by somebody who can get to the heart of the character. But it helps if she's possessed of a fabulous, rich, dark mezzo voice. And Bizet's music is so magical if it's sung well. Oh, and we haven't talked about the Habanera, have we? Well, we haven't got time, but isn't it marvellous? There is a sense. There's a sense that it looks forward, like I've said about so many things in this opera, it looks forward to so many things in the 20th century. It looks forward to tango, it looks forward, those poignant harmonies look forward to, I don't know, Edith Piaf or something. That wonderful, again, Schubertian change to the major. It's all wonderful. So Carmen, cast off the warhorse nonsense that it's accrued. So if you have a chance to watch it, go. It's a fabulous piece, a life-changing piece, a transformative piece, rich and wonderful and strange and mysterious. Thank you for watching, and if you like the content of our channel, please like and subscribe. Consider becoming a patron. The details are in the links below, and see you next time.